looking at? This episode of PoliTreks is sponsored by Fansets. Use discount code PoliTreks, PoliTreks, to get a really nice fancy discount on your next order on fansets.com.
The Prime Directive, the Declaration of Human Rights, the United Federation of Planets, the United Nations, World War II, the Dominion Federation War, the art of war, the teachings of Sirach, Jesus Christ, Kalis the Unforgettable.
Namaste, Homo sapiens. Welcome to another exciting episode of PoliTreks. It's October, so PoliTreks is going to be doing Spooky Trek or Spooky Trek. One of those. I have not decided on the final name yet. So when you see the title of this episode, you know which title I gave careful consideration to and finalized, or panicked in the last minute and just put one and went with it. So Spooky Trek / Spooky Treks is going to be the two episodes that we put out in October because the spooky season. Joining me today is a not very spooky, but an amazing person who you can find on Twitter at RadMissFliss, very well-known Twitter Trekkie social media guy, gal. I will let them tell us their pronouns, yeah. But hey, Fliss, Felicity, which one do you prefer? Do you have
I use she, her pronouns. I'm pretty spooky, I think. I like to think. I'm probably not as spooky as I like to think that I am, but you know.
So joining us is RadMissFliss, and she is very well known on Twitter for her sometimes controversial Trek opinions, but also is a budding artist who is getting into all things animation and just a cool Star Trek fan that I've had the opportunity to be a part of her podcast when she did Faraday along with him. And today she's joining me to talk about the Borg. Anyway, give us a little bit more of an introduction because I did a terrible job, Fliss.
Oh, you did an outstanding job. I'm flattered that you consider me to be like a big Trek person to talk to. You've got your own podcast. That's so cool. I guess I would describe myself as a bit entrepreneurial. I've gone from one thing to another, and it's hard to say whether that's entrepreneurial or ADHD. And I guess it's probably the latter because I don't profit from anything that I do. I'm a terrible Ferengi. I don't have the lobes for business at all. But I love Star Trek. I love sci-fi. I love talking about nerd stuff. And I'm excited to be here tonight talking about the Borg with you, Shashank.
You put that very lightly. RadMissFliss, or Felicity, as we know, only the friends for everyone else is Rad. Now, Felicity puts together a stellar role-playing game camp, one that will knock your socks off. I have no experience with those games, but she invited me to be a part of her podcast called Faraday that she did about a year ago. And we did a few episodes, but the storytelling that she would do in each episode was just stellar. You can go find that on YouTube if you're into. We have a few episodes out there. It's called Faraday, Star Trek tabletop podcast. But all that to say, I am really excited to talk to her today because she says, oh, I'm flattered that you think I am like a big Star Trek person. But once you start listening to her, you'll see what I mean. Anyway, now, one of the things that I've always been scared, the Borg. Have they ever been scary to you?
Yeah, absolutely. The Borg are the antithesis of everything Starfleet. So they're very much the boogeyman. They did such a good job of being the boogeyman that people who are afraid of coming together as one human race sort of preach. They're all technology, they're all science, they're all logic, they're homogenous, and they say they want your distinctiveness, but once they get that distinctiveness, they just turn it into the homogeny that everybody has. So it's very cosmically horrific. It's very visually horrific because they look like scary zombie people, very spooky. And then the Borg babies is just such a terrifying concept. Being born into that life is just a fresh kind of hell that I wouldn't wish upon anybody. I can't imagine what that would be like.
There is a Rage Against the Machine song called No Shelter. And it's a song that was made for the really well-made and not at all bad Zilla movie, The Lakes.
Okay.
And
the one with Oh my gosh,
Ferris
his name
Bueller?
just ran. Yes,
Matthew Broderick.
Matthew Broderick. Nick
Yes.
Nick Totopoulos was the name, and they made a big thing out of his name being hard to pronounce.
That was not one. That was one of the many things that was difficult about it. It's still a sore wound for us kaiju fans. Anyway, the song made by the band was called No Shelter, and in it there's a line, Godzilla pure mother effing filler, take your eyes off the real killer. So it was a song made to kind of parody / comment big blockbuster movies that are made to like scare you and give you jump scare, and they take your eyes off the real killer, which according to Ray Machine are the government, the people that run the economy, etc., etc. I think Star Trek's version of the Borg is one of those real killer, because unlike a typical horror movie or TV show where you get most scared, really bad looking scare, some unsettling. The scariest thing about the Borg is an intellectual that you can't put on a screen, and you open a door that you're not supposed to open and something bad. That will never, you can't show that with the concept that they're trying to project with the Borg, which is assimilation.
Yeah.
You have no choice but to be absorbed into the one thing, the hive.
And it just doesn't stop coming. It just keeps coming for you. So how do you combat that? It's such a it's a big question. It's a large allegory for, I would say, complacency in a melting pot environment. It's very much we see this kind of thing. I'm going to go ahead and attack the platform that we tend to communicate on, which is Twitter. We tend to be that Borg collective. If you speak out against the hive, you can get canceled, and that's a thing. And there's a whole discourse about cancel culture, but steering things back to the Borg, there's a lot there that is a lot older than things like Twitter, and a lot older than the cancel culture discourse, that is the groupthink and the urge for assimilation. I would hesitate to say that it's an accident that the Borg are all very pale, white looking, aliens, but it isn't. And they are a bit of a product of the 80s, the terrifying techno scare of the late 80s. That cyberpunk, less than human question is there, as well as the question of transhumanism that's later brought up when you have characters like Seven of Nine and Icheb that are brought in, that are part Borg or recovered Borg, or even Locutus or Picard who's recovered Borg, or Hugh who's recovered Borg. There's still a person underneath. So where does the person begin and the machine stop? And the Borg are presented as all machine, but we have the Borg Queen too, and she adds humanity to that is undeniably present, and even a little bit creepier, because of her presence there means that we can't just say, oh, well, this is a machine that's acting, that's lurching forward. There is drive behind this. And it brings it back, sort of that Rage Against the Machine, because with, when we tend to look at things and scream at things like, oh, these are the government, or these are the people behind the economy that are, messing things up, there are absolutely some intentional killings. These drone strikes that we're doing overseas that are killing innocent people, these are very real things that intelligent people are behind, saying, we're trying to accomplish this goal, whatever their, altruism is. But also we've got the bigwigs with the money that are influencing opinion, saying things like Amazon should get a seat at the UN because they're big enough to be a country financially. Just there's that mind is there. We've got Borg queens. They're the Bezoses and the Zuckerbergs and the Gates, the technology leaders. That fear is still there, and it's something that can connect with audiences, even from a show that came out in the first appearance of the Borg was 1992. I want to say it was season 3, so we're looking at 80.
Yeah, one
at like 1990, 91. Yeah, that's not,
hey,
people weren't thinking about that.
You're absolutely right. You said a lot of really good things that I'm hoping we can touch on and talk some more about. Now you mentioned, the Borg Queen brings like a whole their humanity and a different perspective to everything. Have you been watching the recent Lower Decks episodes?
I did watch the most recent one, I excretus. Is that the
Yeah.
one we're referring to, where Boimler does the training exercise where he's in the Borg cube?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So they're bringing. I don't know if you know, it's the actress Alice Krige who played the Borg Queen was the Borg.
I think I saw that somewhere. Yeah.
They're also bringing back a younger Borg card.
Oh, I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, it's a recasting. I'll send you an
Ooh.
article on Trek News, which is a website I write for. No big, just casually throwing that in there. Hashtag shameless plug. Hey, I did want to talk to you. So yeah, I've been enjoying those, and I hope they keep expanding on the Borg appearance. You mentioned that, as we learn more about these recovered Borg, that a question starts to form about, is there still a real person, and what happened to the person, and the person versus the cybernetic. We live in 2021 where I can make the argument that without this, my cell phone, I'm not having a human experience. Like if forget even the social media and the communication, I get a tornado alert, right?
Right.
So if I didn't have my phone, I'm choosing myself to have a lesser, because if part of being human is surviving, I'm choosing to risk my survival.
Yeah.
Do you think we as a people are, even though we are not getting the cyberpunk green filter, neon, pale skin scare, do you think we as a people are becoming more like a cybernetic organism hybrid? I will tell you, I've worn glasses since I was 7 years old. I can't see without them. If I didn't have my glasses, I couldn't step out of them.
Yeah, I absolutely think, I do. I think I personally am very excited for it because it presents a lot of interesting opportunities. We have, in terms of medical devices for 3D printing organs, there are a lot of people, I don't know of a lot of people, but there are people with hearing loss who've had some hearing recovered through the use of, I'm not sure what the technical medical terms are for it, but cybernetic enhancements where they've got, metal pins put into their brain that allow them to regain some hearing. And even I have read some pop science stuff. I'm not sure the efficacy of it. Similar stuff for restoring vision.
Not to be too Borgy, I think they're called implants.
Fair enough. And these implants, they're a good thing. And I think that what separates these medical necessity implants from, say, the Borg and even cyberpunk stuff, aesthetic present or not, is a lot of the question of necessity. And if we are to look at cyberpunk, if we look at Mike Pondsmith's cyberpunk setting, a lot of the reason why the cybernetics were involved in that setting was because there was a war where a lot of young people that went off to that war lost their limbs, and it was cheaper to replace the limbs with cybernetics than it was to just bring in new bodies. And in real life, we haven't had that problem as much. There's also a level of compassion in real life that isn't, that necessarily isn't present in the fictional Mike Pondsmith cyberpunk setting. But there are going to be optional implants that we can choose to get that guys like Elon Musk are, like him or loathe him, he's putting money into the Neuralink, which is going to be an upgrade for the phone, where you will be able to just play the music directly in your head. It will also help do things ostensibly like regulate hormone levels, which could be outstanding for menopausal women, women with hormone imbalances, or men with hormone imbalances. I'm hoping there will be applications for transgender people as well. Because it would be lovely for people who are, not able to produce the hormones they need, to have a computer-regulated hormone release system that could have their brain manufacture the hormones for them. Because at the moment, like my pituitary gland, it generates some hormones, but it doesn't generate all my hormones. I still have to take pills to supplement that. I guess this would be the important part of saying that I myself am a transgender person. And also the disclaimer that if you are a transgender person and you feel like your hormones are fine, you don't need medical intervention in order to be the gender that you identify as. I do want to be clear about that. But for those of us that do, Neuralink is a possibility in the future. So I do think that we are moving towards that, for better or for worse. And we're going to increasingly run up against this question of, when does a person stop being a person and when do they become a machine? And there's some bigger questions as well that we tend to take for granted in our modern sci-fi, that most of these things like Star Trek are post-singularity, which is describing an event where computers reach and supersede the ability to reason at the speed of and with the capacity and versatility of living sapient creatures. And a lot of the question of transhumanism isn't just like, okay, if I get all of these machine parts, am I human or not? But also, if I take my brain and transfer it into a machine, am I still human? And the Borg Queen, when we see her, is just, a head and shoulders and a little spindly mechanical spine that gets put onto a robot body. So is the Borg Queen still an organic creature?
So remember at the beginning of the episode when Felicity said, "Oh, I'm so flattered, big Star Trek," and then proceeds to wax poetic about the deep concept in Star Trek for a good 2 minutes straight. So I will let all of you listening make the judgment. Let's talk about some of the Borg appearances in Star Trek, but we still don't know where the Borg came from, right?
They came from the Delta Quadrant. We know
I
that.
mean, sorry, as in how they were born and how they began.
The genesis of the Borg.
Yes.
Technically, we don't know that. Yeah. I feel like there's probably been a book exploring that concept, but I am not well read on Trek fiction. So maybe ask the folks at Literary TREKS. Perhaps they might have a better idea.
No, me neither. I've always wondered what their origin would be like. And I wouldn't be surprised if it was something to do with human beings or very humanoid creatures and our messed up conflicts with technology that eventually just led to the creation of Borg. Like very much like Skynet, in Terminator. I wouldn't be surprised if that. So if we did go chronologically, the first time we'd see the Borg would be before with
Enterprise.
Yes.
Yeah.
Enterprise would be the first, but before Enterprise, wouldn't it be First Contact?
Well, there's time play involved in First Contact, so yes and yes. On the subject of origins, though, I think Discovery did potentially point us in sort of the right direction in season 2. At least I had sort of gotten the impression that the Borg might have been an offshoot. I'm forgetting what the name of the Section 31 computer was, but that Section 31 computer might.
Oh, in Discovery?
Yeah. Control might have been an origin, especially when you have, they traveled 900 years into the future or whatever. One of the ideas that I've always sort of had, that it's not really implied anywhere, but this Fliss head fiction, which you get for having me on, is that the Borg are the Federation, but perverted. They reached out, they not conquered, but had all the things, and in order to try and make all the things work, they had something like control that would regulate them. And when they couldn't sustain themselves, instead of staying where they are, they went back into the past, and somehow in all of the mess had sort of an identity loss or identity crisis where they don't know or don't care about who they were. So when they re-encounter the Federation, it's a bit of an awakening that causes them to come and want all of the stuff that the Federation has. And it's a little peculiar that they go directly for Earth and are okay with going into the past to assimilate humanity before they were worth assimilating. Heavy air quotes on worth assimilating. Anyway, there's my head quotes, but we can get back into First Contact, which takes us to the pre-Enterprise era and the Phoenix back in 2063.
I think that is correct. I'm hoping I can live till 26, so that will happen and I will be there. Because so many things from Star Trek came true, just in a different form. Why is this something that people think, oh, maybe it won't happen, and it's just like a date that they threw out there. But going back to First Contact, did you like the movie? Are you a fan?
I am a fan of First Contact. I think First Contact is probably my favorite Star Trek movie. I do think that it's especially funny in some respects because you can sort of see how the direction changed from the show to the movie, where after Generations they were like, okay, we want to start like trying to get these actors some awards. They're on the screen now, like they're on the silver screen, they're not just on TV screens. And so Picard, whose reaction to the Borg in The Next Generation when he meets Hugh, and in later episodes that not come into memory right away, he's pretty, he doesn't like them, but he's pretty calm about it. And he definitely sees them as these are beings that we need to deal with very carefully. And there's a feeling of regret. But in First Contact, when he sees them, it's anger. It's very much like he can show the anger. You see the anger. So there's a bit of a contrast between movie Picard and show Picard that I think is comical. But the movie itself is a lot of fun. I loved being able to see LeVar Burton's face without the visor on for the first time. I mean, reading Rainbow as well, I suppose. But
the line must be drawn here, this far, no farther. That was
precisely.
That was made to attract that Oscar crowd, you know?
Yeah, I don't think they got any.
They made a lot of money, though. Jonathan Frakes and that team. Jonathan Frakes directed First Contact, and then they gave him Insurrection. But
I liked Insurrection too, but I'm pretty liberal about what I like. Throwing my like around for Star Trek. I like it when it's good. I tend to like it when it's bad. I like it. It is what it is.
The Borg appeared in 6 episodes on TNG. Q Who, the 2 parts of Best of Both Worlds. I Borg, the 2 parts of Descent. So Descent was one big, and they were barely in Emissary, which was the pilot, and then of course First Contact. But also Voyager is where they had, I think, their biggest part to play in the story of a Star Trek show, even though it played like a pretty significant role with the role of the captain in The Next Generation. Voyager and the Borg link very, very deeply. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that I think fans could look forward to, knowing, because TNG had finished by the time Voyager was getting going. So knowing that Voyager was in the Delta Quadrant and knowing that the Borg came from the Delta Quadrant, that meant that somewhere in that 70,000 light year journey, they're going to have to run into the Borg. I think a lot of people feel that Voyager diminished the threat of the Borg in a lot of ways. But I'm not sure I agree with that. What do you think?
I don't know if they diminished it. I think they humanized it a lot more, especially with 7 of 9, who would go on to become more popular than Janeway, which at the time was kosher. It was not taken well by famously. Everybody knows the stories. I'm not going to rehash. But yeah, I think that part of the Borg kind of, I don't know, again, it was not diminished. It was just humanized. And of course, because it was the late 90s, it was kind of sexualized with 709, because she'd still have the eye implant, and then they would make all the pictures, or rather the photos, which is what I meant by picture. And, I think in that way, it kind of unintentionally sexualized it, but I don't know if it ever diminished it, because Spooky Treks, the first one we're talking about is the Borg. So we're still pretty scared about it.
Yeah. I think they were certainly, a lot of what I saw with the Borg was that their answer to what did the Borg fear was not the Federation, but the Undine. And fear is such an interesting word to use with the Borg. They had to create something, I guess, that would draw the attention of the Borg away from Voyager to let them get through that area. But if the Borg were so hell-bent on conquering humanity, there would have to be something keeping them in the Delta Quadrant away from humanity to begin with. So it stands to reason that they've been dealing with species 8472, which I think I just mentioned is the Undine, which is the name that they were given in Star Trek Online, but it's never mentioned anywhere in the show. They're always species 8472, from fluid space. That was a very interesting concept because I don't really know how to characterize if the Borg are scary. What is species 8472? Like they've got to be granddaddy scary, right? You don't just bring out Ghidorah to fight Godzilla. You bring out Mecha King Ghidorah to fight Godzilla. So you've got to have something that's bigger and badder than the biggest in order to be scary. So I think that created a much more tense environment for the crew of Voyager, where now they're navigating politics between two significantly larger entities, because not only are they not able to call upon the Federation, as minuscule as it is relative to the Borg and species 8472, they are ambassadors of the Federation in the middle of this space, and their only interest is getting home. So the end game with Voyager was such an interesting pair of episodes. Some of my favorite Voyager episodes are End Games Part 1 and 2. I think that was their names. This is where I'm rusty on my Star Trek, is remembering the names of the episodes.
Again, you're not the Borg. You're human. You're allowed to not know everything.
Yeah.
I'm sure the people listening, either they know or they're more than happy. So it's definitely not an issue. We appreciate you for listening. Before we talk a little more about the Borg, I do have to jump in and tell you, have you heard of Fanset?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Well, Fansets is a mom and pop company, really. It's run by three lovely people, but it's really just a very small company that for Star Trek, their entire mission is just to make the best Star Trek pin that ever exists. You might have even seen Fansets pins and not known about it, but you can go to fansets.com and use the discount code PoliTreks for PoliTreks. Yeah, just go to fansets.com and look at Star Trek, and you'll see. If you've ever been to a convention that has anything to do with Star Trek, you might have even seen them on the internet. That's all they do. Their mission is to eventually catalog most of the very well-known things in Star Trek. Right now, they're running a series called The Women of Trek, where they're making really cool standout pins about famous women.
Yeah, these are outstanding. I absolutely just pulled this up on my phone to look at them. They've got more than 300 stars. For a second there, you froze on my screen.
Yeah, you froze on mine. Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's probably me. I'm on wireless internet up here.
You and me both. I'm also on. Anyway, I will tell you, as we're talking, they're trying to put out pins every week, which is really cool. And I wish I'd done the podcast a little more often so I could catalog all the new pins but this week they're releasing the Xindi Commander Dolim. They're doing Dr. Taylor from Star Trek 4. They're doing Admiral Kirk in his maroon uniform. And then for Women of Trek, they're doing B'Elanna Torres. And these will be available or were available starting October 1st. And like I said, they're just a small local shop. Like they're a sponsor for Trek Geeks, but I've just known them just as part of the Trek fan culture well before I ever became a part of Trek. And they're just really good people who love Star Trek pins. So I just had to throw that plug in for our sponsor before we went on.
Oh, you know what? I think I have one on my purse. Do they have one for the Bonaventure?
They probably have a Star Trek pin for everything that you have ever.
They do, and I do have a Bonaventure on my purse. It is one of my favorite pins. The Bonaventure holds a special place in my heart.
And that's just what they do. They make pins that become this iconic, minuscule version of that character or ship. And I wish. One of the things I wish is just I could buy all the pins, because eventually it just starts racking up. Now I buy them few and far in between, but they're really good pins. And if you can afford them and you like Star Trek and you like pins, fansets.com. I don't just say that because they're a sponsor that help us keep our show up. They're just really cool people who like Star Trek.
Well, I'm not sponsored by anybody, and I've been toting around one of their pins for years, and I'll definitely say I agree that they've got absolutely outstanding pins. Go and pick yours up today.
That was great. You did really well. Thank you for
find the right one for you.
Yeah, and possibly if you're a Trek fan, there are more than one because
go and find the 10 for you.
Yeah, 10 is a good number. 10 is where you should go. Hey, so what is your theory about species 8472 or the Undine? What do you think there?
That's a really difficult question. I don't feel like outside of Star Trek Online, they're very well explored. And that's sort of intentional. A lot of what makes them scary is our imagination sort of running wild. This is
It's the same like the Borg's origin. Like we don't know, and that's what makes it more scary.
Yeah. I mean, with the species 8472, I think what we have to fear in terms of that is it's not just that they're, entirely bioorganic, spacefaring aliens, because that's cool. But, you could be those things and not be scary. But with these guys, what they are is they are from fluidic space, which is, when we see it, sort of implied to be connected in a way that our universe is disconnected by the void of space. Instead, literally everything everywhere is part of this fluid, and whatever species evolved, which presumably is just species 8472 in its many different physiological shapes, all of these things developed with a need to feed. So there's no intergalactic politics in fluid space. It's just species 8472. And when it comes into our space, what it sees potentially are more food or threats to itself. And it, being biological, can continuously consume and reproduce infinitely, potentially turning our space into more fluidic space, depending on what that even goes into. Like I said, the imagination can run wild.
8472 also continues TREKS fascination with boss level races based in fluids like the Dominion.
Yeah.
Because they're also just the great, I forget what it's called, the Great Sea, the big water body that Odo eventually goes into and comes out as a human. It's just, there's something about that kind of fluid. And even I believe the ending, All Good Thing, has its place somewhere near a water body. So it's just more philosophical stuff. Hey, let's move on to the one appearance they had in Enterprise, which I think mostly was, it might have started out as an Easter egg kind of episode where, oh my God, what if they discover, it's like a writer's room exercise, what if they discover a body and you go, John, and John's like, okay, they discover a body. Let's just say they're like just there and they're like, just we don't know who these people are. And then it's an ice station and then they find a capsule. You go, Stacy, and then Stacy is like, oh, and then we see the face and it's the Borg. And I feel like that's what happened with Regeneration.
Yeah, a little bit. Feel like Enterprise was sort of like that in general. I think that was one of the charming things about Enterprise, is they gave it's a little bit of that episodic nature that we got from TOS, where they still weren't committed to doing an entire serialized Star Trek. We wouldn't get that until Discovery. So there was a little bit of these serialized episodes that they would test the water with because they did so well on DS9. But these sort of writers' room exercises pop up every now and then and create these real delightful moments in Enterprise. I think certainly too, there's something about finding something trapped in the ice that speaks to us as humans, since we find, we have these stories like H.P. Lovecraft at the Mountain of Madness, or we have this movie, John Carpenter's The Thing. The ice is unforgiving, it's inhospitable, you can't have anything there, but it also has the promise of preserving something to be revived back to life again. And although we get some weird, questionable content in Star Trek sometimes that tends to lean more towards eugenics than it really ought to, they tend not to believe too much in cryogenics, aside from the space seed stasis chamber and then the 3 people from the late 80s that were frozen and shot into space, I suppose. But we don't see it too often. Cryogenics isn't talked about too often in Star Trek, but there's that, that will it not wake up thing. How frozen is this? And as a Borg, we've seen Voyager already. We know they've got nanoprobes that are going to kick into life, and I think there's some unanswered questions too with those Borg, which if they came to life, wouldn't they then try and reach out to the collective, or would they not be able to reach the collective because the collective didn't have a network that could keep them in the hive mind. So a little bit unclear.
Isn't
on
the
that
ending
one.
of Regeneration the realization that the Borg found the location of Earth and they send it through their collective?
I haven't seen. I'd have to go back and watch it again.
Yeah, that's the one episode I saw today, and the
Okay.
ending is that their invasion is unsuccessful. They're kicked out by Archer too, but then Archer learns that the one thing they could retrieve was the location of Earth, and then his Vulcan science officer who escapes, she says, "Oh, but it'll take at least 200 years for the message, if that is
To
even
Paul.
possible."
Yeah.
And then he says, so that means in the 24th century, the invasion is what Archer says, and that's where they leave off the episode. So that's the one like thing they do in the episode, which I think was important in a way to connect it to everything Borg.
Yeah. And a nice bit of science there as far as the speed at which information travels, which is something that's implied far more often than it's talked about in Trek, especially in the TNG era where they've got advanced sublight, or not sublight, but superliminal communication devices or something.
I also recently finished reading the Star Trek Year 5 comic, and in that comic, one of the main bad guys are the Tholian from the original, and their goal is that along with Gary Seven from the original, they've seen the future, and in the future, there's just a lot of destruction and Armageddon. So their goal is to trap the entire universe or the galaxy that they can encounter in a state of nostalgia. So essentially just hitting the pause button on everything. So I felt it was like a different kind of assimilation, which is like forcing everybody to just be paused. Hey, it's a really good comic series. I recommend you check it out if you enjoy it. Also, just speaking of comics, people who enjoy the Borg, there is a really good comic called Star Trek Hive, written by Bannon Braga. And it's a comic that has, this is all I'll say about it, Locutus and that's the cover, is just Locutus and among other people whose surprises us. There is also Star Trek Boldly Go, which came out, it's weird to say this, but almost 10 years ago at this point, but it's a comic book series that continued the Kelvin universe. And there is an arc or like a good 3-4 issue series. Spock is taken. That's just the cover again is just, it's the Locutus face, but the Locutus face pose, but instead of Picard, it's no. The other things that I think are left to talk about really with the Borg are apart from those episodes. What did you think of the Borg's appearance in Picard?
So that's the first time that we really got to see them after Voyager. So these are the ones that Janeway has broken, more or less. And they've got the recovery project. But also, most interestingly, it is after the destruction of Romulus, which was discussed as part of the plot of the 2009 Star Trek movie by J.J. Abrams. So there's a lot of connection there that comes from the story from Star Trek Online, the story that was told in Star Trek Online, because they don't really tell it in any screen sources that I know of. Maybe there's a prequel book that I haven't read, I'm not sure. But I know they tell the story in Star Trek Online that the Romulans started experimenting with Borg technology following the Borg invasion, and they got their hands on this cube, which is presumably the same cube that we see in Picard. And the fact that they're still working on it is so reckless to me. Like, I'm glad that they're sort of trying to recover some of the Borg that were assimilated. I think that that's a very promising direction for the development of those characters. But even then, they are now not just prisoners of the Borg, they're prisoners of the Romulans who own this cube reclamation project. And people like Icheb and Seven of Nine are sort of on the fringes and only able to kind of sit back and watch, and weren't able to do very much. It's also been, a year or two since, when did Picard come out? Is that 2019 or 2020?
It started
2020
in
is a blur.
Started in 2019, ended in.
Okay, so it's been more than a year now then since I've seen Picard, because I only did the one watch through. I need to go back and watch it again. There's so much on the docket, and with new Lower Decks coming out every week.
OMG, RadMissFliss at RadMissFliss says he has only watched Picard once. # not a real fan. #
That's right.
Fliss is cancelled.
Track checked.
No, I people, I kind of say it jokingly, but also not. People got really mad at me when I said that I didn't enjoy the last 3 episode card. PoliTreks did like a watch through, or like
Mhm.
after every episode we did a commentary episode or like a breakdown episode. And the last one was just so bad. I couldn't bring myself to release it because it was just all negative, and I didn't want. But so take that for what you will. I kind of still enjoyed what we saw of the Borg. I will say this: I'm glad the Borg finally got an appearance in today's VFX. With
Yeah.
today's CGI. That was the best part of it, is that I could really see the Borg in their menacing, horrifying today's CGI form, as
Yeah.
opposed to the matte paintings and the handmade makeup of the
I mean,
90s.
I think that's something that I would be excited for even in the next season of Discovery. Is I want to see more modern takes on the Borg. And I think one of the things that I'm disappointed about the end of sort of that Kelvin timeline, as far as media is concerned, is that I would like to see more of what their original takes would be, since they did more homages to Star Trek design rather than straight like we're going to just copy and paste Star Trek and do it with younger actors. There were a lot of very interesting design things. I think that a modern Borg would be a bit more like a Cylon. You wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that they were Borg, except perhaps that they were pale and could project a laser beam out of their eye if they wanted, or something like that. Because for practical reasons, it's far more logical to appear as the rest of a species does, and then break down into a million tiny nanobots and just assimilate everything. So there's a lot that could be done VFX wise with Borg that I'm excited to see in the future, especially because with Picard moving forward and with Discovery moving forward, even in the far beyond past Picard, we can see the ways in which the Borg moved on from where we saw them wounded at the end of Endgame and even in Picard. Did they rally? That was something we were sort of getting into in Faraday. Was for me, the Borg that rallied were rallied along some kind of quasi-religious lines, where they had something called the beacon, which was an automatic signal that was calling out to try and bring those Borg back together so that they could come together and be a new force. Something that would terrify you as the captain of a starship going into the Delta Quadrant, and your crew, who then knew that they would be squaring off against perhaps not the Borg at their full might, but certainly the Borg. So I think that was an episode we recorded, but didn't end up getting published.
What I didn't really appreciate was, it felt like at the end of Picard season 1, the Borg just became Jamhadar.
Yeah.
They just became the vessel, the plot device for Narek and his sister. Narek, if you remember, was the Romulan spy. And it just became the plot device for him and his sister. And we got a really cool moment with Seven becoming the Borg queen, the quote unquote queen, when she manipulated the vessel. I hope we get a do-over. I'm excited, especially because Q is coming back in season 2. So I'm hoping they will do something super with the Borg. And I can't get enough of the Borg. I think they're great. Like I said, it's the real killer to me, because it's just terrifying and horrifying on so many intellectual levels.
Yeah. I want to see more of them in Lower Decks, to be honest. Every episode in the intro, they have them fighting the Pakled and the Borg, and the Romulans are all fighting in the intro of every episode. And we've seen the Pakled and we've sort of seen Romulans, but we haven't really seen any Borg except for in this latest episode. So I'm hoping that there will be some Borg action somewhere in the future. Move us away from this Pakled storyline. I don't really care for that one too much.
Before we leave, I do have a fun question for you, or what I think is pretty fun. If you could Borgify any part of your body, 1, would you do it? And 2, which one? When I say Borgify, for those playing along with this game at home, you are choosing to replace a part of your body, the human part of your body, with the cybernetic / technology based part, with the understanding that someday it could possibly be at some point controlled by the collective.
I think I'd probably risk it. I think I probably would. I'd probably have my circulatory system replaced so that I lived for longer, or better yet, my digestive system, so that either I didn't have to eat and I could choose to eat if I wanted to, but I would never get stomach aches because I'm very done with stomach aches for the whole rest of my life. Any digestive issues, I'm just done with those. So heck on those. I would get rid of those. Never have a stomach ache again with the possibility that I might assimilate and destroy everyone that I love. Seems like a fair trade, right? Probably. I don't know. You decide. At me, at RadMissFliss. Tell me whether or not you think I'm crazy getting rid of stomach aches for, possibly putting the world at risk.
I'm glad you also threw in your plug for your Twitter account. It's almost like you've done pod.
Something like that. I still listen to a few every once in a while.
I'll tell you, for me, it would be the most cliched answer. It would be one of my eyes, just because I want to be able to shoot lasers.
That is pretty cool.
Anyway, hey, at RadMissFliss on Twitter, Felicity Pickens, thank you for joining me. I hope this is the first of many, many, many appearances of you on the show. I really enjoyed having you. Thank you for jumping in and talking all things Borg.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It was great to reconnect with you.
Is there anything I didn't ask you or we didn't talk about that you wanted to talk about the Borg?
I don't think so. I think I kind of jabberjawed a lot.
It was great. I enjoyed it. And I'm sure people listening have been enjoying the episode. If you didn't, or if you did, you can find our Twitter on at PoliTreks. That's PoliTreks. If you're an email person, you can talk to us on politrekspodcast@gmail.com. That's our email ID. Just send us an email saying how much you like us or hate us. We'll take both. Please don't forget to share this episode. If you're listening to it on YouTube, please like it, or anywhere that gives you a like option. Like it, share it, leave us a review on iTunes. We've not been doing very well with our iTunes. So if you don't mind taking a moment, it really helps out if you can leave us a good review on iTunes, or a bad one. We'll take a bad one. We don't mind. And if you just need to yell at me personally, I'm at gutter_hero on Twitter. It's about the only social media I do. But
Good content.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoy being a nerd online. Just thank you so much for listening. Thank you for joining me, Felicity Pickens / at RadMissFliss, and live long and prosper and onward to Starside.
Peace and long life.
Coconut.